Good morning, happy Monday. Jackie Broman here from TBA Law, coming to you live Monday mornings, giving you short snippets of legal information. So I've done this all year, Monday mornings. A lot of the videos are posted onto Facebook, so you can go back and look through those. The first lot was all on wills and estate planning and deceased estates, which is my area of specialty. TBA Law also does a lot of work in property law though. So I also then did a short series on conveyancing and transferring land. And now I'm doing a short series on leasing. In between there, I also did a short series on neighbours and living in the community, a series of 4 videos about what regulations there are in place around dealing with your neighbours over noise, fencing. Sorry, there's a spider crawling up the wall. Anyway, so now I'm doing a short series on leases. So today I'm talking about when tenants want to end a lease. Last week I spoke about tenants' rights and obligations during a lease. Next week I'm going to speak about it from a landlord's perspective, and then the following week how to break a lease from a landlord's perspective. But today it's all about tenants. So tenants wanting to end a lease. So I'll talk on 2 main points. The first will be the residential tenancies, and the second then I'll talk about retail tenancies. So with residential tenancies, you've got either a fixed term tenancy or you've got a periodic tenancy. So sometimes once you start a fixed term tenancy, it might be, for example, for 6 months. And after the 6 months expires, you then go into a periodic tenancy, because then you're just month to month. So if you are a tenant that is in a periodic tenancy, you can end a lease with 28 days notice because it's month to month, so you're fine. If you're in a fixed term lease, basically you'd be breaking the lease if you tried to end the lease before the end of the fixed term. So if you had that 6-month lease and you wanted to end it on the 6 months, that's fine. You give a notice that that's when you're ending the lease, and it won't continue on a month to month and you'll be leaving. No issues. However, if you're 2 months into a 6-month lease and some kind of issue arises and you've got to leave, understand that you are breaking a lease and that you're up to compensate the landlord. So the landlord is entitled to compensation from you in terms of a reletting fee that they'd be charged by their real estate agent, advertising fees that they'll be charged by their real estate agent to find a new tenant, and loss of rent from between when you leave and stop paying rent and when they get a new tenant. So if you break a lease, you are breaking out of a legal contract early, so understand that there will be consequences. So that is ending a lease from a residential tenancy perspective. There is one other way to try and get out of a fixed lease early. So again, a 6-month lease, and you might want to get out in 2 months because something has happened. You can actually apply to VCAT to vary the terms of the lease to end it early. It's not to say though that you wouldn't necessarily have damages to pay to the landlord as well, because again, the landlord thought they'd be secure and happy for 6 months with you in there, and you're changing that early. So just be aware of those things. Now, it's very similar, in fact, from a retail tenancy perspective. So if you're leasing a shop, generally your fixed term period is a lot longer than a residential lease. So you might have 3 to 5 years on your first term of the lease, and then you might have 2 other options on your lease, each of either 3 or 5 years. So, for example, let's say your first term is 3 years, and you're in a fixed term lease, you want to end that lease. You can end it at the end of the first 3 years, no worries. So you just tell the landlord you won't be taking up the option and you'll be leaving. Again, If you are in a fixed term for the first 3 years and you don't actually take up an option for the next 3 years, you go into a periodic lease automatically, just like with a residential tenancy. So you end up being month to month. So it's called overholding on a retail lease. So if you're in overholding, which is like a periodic lease, you only have to generally give a month's notice to leave. If you're in that fixed term lease, so first 3 years and the business is actually not going as well as you thought it would, you're stuck for 3 years. So you can, just like a residential tenant, you can break a fixed term lease, but understand that there's consequences. And they're far greater consequences on a retail tenant because obviously the term is longer. So say that you've made it 18 months into a 3-year lease and you want to leave and shut the business down. Technically, you are responsible for paying still the rent for the next 18 months. Plus compensation to the landlord potentially in terms of other damages. Now, a landlord is supposed to mitigate their loss by trying to find a new tenant, but if they can't, then you have to pay it. There's no way of getting out of it. So just be aware of that in terms of fixed term leases. The other thing around a retail lease is that there's more requirements in terms of returning the property to the landlord in the same condition that it was in at the beginning. Fair wear and tear accepted, just like with a residential lease. However, with retail leases, quite often the tenant goes in and make changes to the property, they install things, they might put in a kitchen, they might put in internal walls. If you did that, it all has to be removed and returned to how it was, and potentially you need to repaint the whole place. So at the end of a lease for a retail tenant, there's far more of a burden too than a residential tenant. So there you go. They're the basics of ending a lease from a tenant perspective. So just like my other videos, I'll post this one to Facebook so that you can go back through all the videos on the page and look at anything at the time that it's relevant for you, and tag anyone in it if it's relevant for them. And as I said, next Monday will be rights and obligations from a landlord's perspective for both residential and retail leasing. So I'll see you next Monday for that short snippet of legal information. And until then, hope you have a great week. See ya.